What's up, Dragon Brood? We just got done with the debut stream for Bloomburrow. I tried not to watch a lot of it so I could give you my fresh takes right after it's done. Well, let's hop into it and see all the information we found out that we now know about Bloomburrow. Right, and I know y'all are going to be really excited to go all over the new cards, but I want to cover the mechanics first, then we'll get into the new cards. Right, so hopping in, there's obviously new mechanics. We have a bunch of different creature types, and they're probably going to be tied to each type, I would guess. But here we have Offspring, which I'm sure is going to be some version of Kicker from the way it looks like it's worded. But we have this Tender Wild Guide, which is a colorless and a green for a 2/2. It's a Possum Druid, which is actually hilarious that we have Possum as a thing. But it says for Offspring 2, you may pay an additional 2 when you cast a spell. If you do, then this creature enters, create a 1/1 token copy of it. And this is one of the things we talked about in the other video I did about 20 cards that get better after rotation. Stuff that cares about tokens, well, here we go. Here's a whole token mechanic. It also taps to add a mana, which is pretty sweet, and then you can tap it and put a +1/+1 counter on the creature. So this actually fits a few different decks, right? If you just want to ramp up, if you want to play something with tokens, if you want to put a +1/+1 counter on things, like this can go in 3 different things. This is actually a pretty cool little rare. Right, this next mechanic's called Gift, and it's on a Kitnap, which I need to go look up Kitnap, but this is 2 colorless blue for an enchantment aura. Says you gift a card, so you may promise an opponent a gift as you cast this spell. If you do, when it enters, they draw a card. Okay, so you enchant the creature. When this enters, tap enchanted creature. If the gift wasn't promised, then put 3 stun counters on it. If you control an you control enchanted creature. Okay, so this is where, so you steal the creature, but if you don't let your opponent draw a card, then you'll get the thing tapped for 3 turns. Okay, that's weird, but interesting. So you can choose to be like, hey, I'm playing this, you get a card, I just steal your thing. So it's like a control magic, but your opponent gets to draw a card. But if not, then you get it, but it's tapped, your opponent just didn't get a card. That's interesting. So it's a mechanic where there's going to be a downside, but you can negate the downside by letting your opponent draw a card. There's probably going to be a lot of opponents drawing cards, I think. But here's a different variation on Gift. It's called Parting Gust. It's 2 white for an instant. Gift a tapped fish. So when you cast it, your opponent can get a tapped 1/1 blue fish. Exile target non-token creature. If the gift wasn't promised, return that creature to the battlefield under its owner control with a +1/+1 counter on it. Okay, this is kind of cool. So this is one where you can exile a thing and your opponent gets a 1/1 token. Or you can just have the thing leave and come back, which could work for your own stuff from the sound of things, which is kind of amusing. So yeah, this is a little bit different. You can use it offensively or defensively, but yeah, this is quirky. I'm here for it though. All right, then we have Forage on an Osteomancer Adept. It's a colorless and a black for a 2/2 Death Touch. Squirrel Warlock. That's actually a funny set of words. And then you can tap it, and it says, until end of turn, you may cast creature spells from your graveyard by foraging in addition to paying their other cost. If you cast the spell this way, that creature enters with a finality counter on it. Meaning, if it goes to the graveyard or whatever, it just is exiled instead. And it says to forage, exile 3 cards from your graveyard or sacrifice a food. If a creature with a finality counter on it would die, it's exiled instead. This is pretty cool. You can cast creature spells from your graveyard by removing cards or sacrificing food, and then they come into play with the finality counter. This is actually pretty useful in a lot of different decks. I could even see mid-range Golgari trying to take advantage of this because, just getting back a Shieldred or a Glissa or whatever could be pretty powerful, honestly, in the long run. This is a cool card. So many new mechanics. All right, Valiant. This is on a Seedglaive Mentor, colorless red-white for a 3/2 mouse soldier that has vigilance and haste. So that's a lot for 3 mana. And then whenever the Mentor becomes target of a spell or ability you control for the first time each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Also very strong. Now, this is, from what I'm reading, this is kind of like heroic in a way, where like you target your things, they get a bonus. However, this is once each turn on each of these creatures. So you can't play it like heroic, where you have 3 or 4 things that whenever you cast a non-creature spell, they all trigger. This is specifically to the mice, it looks like, and once per turn the way all their abilities are worded. But still a powerful ability nonetheless, and the cards seem pretty decent on rate, even if you don't target them. The next ability we have is Expend. This is on a Junkblade Bruiser with 3 colorless and green-red split mana if you want to play Gruul, so 5 total, for a 4/5 Raccoon Berserker. So kind of a big creature for this set, actually. Trample, whenever you expend 4, Junkblade Bruiser gets +2/+1 till end of turn. You expend 4 as you spend your 4th total mana to cast spells during your turn. So if you spend at least 4 mana on the turn, this is bigger. Like, that's kind of interesting. Also, something else to note is that you may have to keep track of how much mana was spent during the turn, because let's say they played a 2 mana creature with haste or something, attack with this and the 2 mana thing. Well, now if they play anything else with 2 during the combat, like, there's going to be a +2/+1 coming, because they spent 4 on that turn. So kind of an interesting thing, a little bit awkward, but kind of cool. Actually, I was going to skip past this, but the way it's worded, there is something to note. It says when your 4th mana is spent to cast spells. So if you move over an equipment, that doesn't count for mana spent towards spells. So just something to note there. All right, and this last one is called Paw Print, and it looks like Paw Print isn't really a resource or anything. You just choose 5 paw prints worth of things when you cast these spells. So this is Season of Weaving. It's a 4 colorless blue sorcery, and it says choose 5 paw prints worth of, I'm just going to say paws, but that's weird. I don't know. Anyway, choose up to 5 paws worth of modes. You can choose the same one more than once. So you can draw a card for 1. For 2, you can choose an artifact or creature you control, create a token copy, or for 3, return each non-land, non-token permanent to its owner's hand. So yeah, so this is wild. So for 6 mana, some combinations you could do. You could return everything and draw 2 cards. You could draw 5 cards for 6 mana. You could copy something twice and draw a card. You could copy a thing and bounce stuff, which would be a weird thing to do. Probably don't want to do that. Actually, not true. Well, maybe. Depends on what it is. But yeah, there's weird combinations of things you could do here. Or you could copy 2 things, draw a card, right? I don't know how many of these there are, but it is kind of interesting. Something else to note, they put out an article about things you can collect in Bloomburrow, and just top of mind, so while we cover this and it's at least spoken about, you're going to get all these different planeswalkers and things. You'll get 20 what they call differently imagined things, courageous critters, in the set. They did show us Jace, Liliana, and Nissa here, just kind of as creatures from Bloomburrow, but these are more of like a special insert and not really standard legal. There's also Tameo as a big bunny with huge floppy ears. That's cute. We didn't get an example of these, but they were shown that there's going to be a Japanese artist that's going to actually make a bunch of these with, it looks like alternate art, and will be some type of raised foil with anime style. So people are probably going to be excited by those 20 cards. Cool insert. Honestly, we'll see how much they're worth, but probably it'll be a lot of fun for people if you're a fan of this artist. By the way, the artist's name is Mitsuhiro Arita. I don't think I'm familiar with their work, but anime stuff has gone over well with Magic fans before, so not really a surprise they're doing this. And then they made something called Calamity Beast, which I guess are just powerful, bigger creatures, since I guess the set's full of smaller creatures. There's supposedly 8 of these, 7 mythic, 1 rare, and they have field note versions. So they just look kind of like the artwork from old field note books, I guess. So we'll see if these are cool. We'll talk about these cards here more in a second. And then, of course, there's going to be full art lands, because we've been doing these all the time. Not really much of a surprise. But it looks like each one's going to have 4 seasons, which is actually kind of cool. So if you want to get the winter ones, you can play that. Or if you want to theme your decks toward a certain season, you can do that now, which would be kind of sweet. And there's the other 2 planes for the fall and winter, if you want to check that. Or autumn, I guess. And then there was something they introduced called a value booster, which is a little weird. But I feel like we've done something like this a long time ago in the past. Like 8+ years ago, I think. Or tried something similar. But in this case, it's going to be a cheaper booster that comes with 6 cards, it looks like. Or actually, I guess 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 as it turns out. So you get 3 uncommons, 3 commons, 2 uncommons, 1 wild card that could be any rarity, and then one card that can be a land, a traditional foil, or a special guest card. So it's like a half-size booster. I don't know why we keep doing this. I don't know if these will be super popular, but if people just, as retailers, want to have a value option of maybe like $1.50, $2 pack, whatever these are going to end up being, all right, a $2 pack for somebody to just pick up a couple of cards. All right, we'll see if that goes over, but I'd expect this is more of a test run of a thing than something that's going to be permanent, but we'll see. Right, all that being said, let's talk about some cards. And I'm going to try to go quickly, so I may misspeak on some of these because I'm looking at them for the first time. But I want to try to get through them because there are a lot of them. I'm at least going to try to hit all the rares and mythics, and then we'll see if we get some of the commons or uncommons in. But we're going to start here with Hugs, Grizzly Guardian. 2 green, 2 red, and X for a 5/5 Badger Warrior. So this is a pretty good-sized creature, and it has Trample. Legendary, of course, since it has a proper name. And when it enters, exile the top X cards from your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play those cards. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. This card's actually pretty sweet. I mean, mostly because it is just a 5/5 for 4 with Trample and has upside of letting you play additional lands, which is kind of cool. But later in the game, it's something you can just maybe pay 6 and get to look at 2 extra cards. And you can play those or play extra lands. Super nice. So a good late game card for the green-red decks. However, it also could just go into a ramp style deck, right? Like, maybe you're just pumping a bunch of mana out. Okay, now you have like 8 or 9 mana. You're great. Play this and exile 4 things. Now, it isn't when you cast. It does have to enter the battlefield. So there is that downside to spending all that extra mana. But still a very sizable body with significant upside. Right, this one is 3 Tree City. It's a legendary land. As it enters, you choose a creature type. You can tap for colorless, or you can pay 2 and tap, choose a color. Add an additional amount of mana of that color equal to the number of creatures you control of the chosen type. So this is like a budget-friendly Gaia's Cradle, sort of, for a creature type. So in this case, if you say squirrel, and you have 6 squirrels, you can pay 2, tap this, choose whatever color you need, so we might say green, and then you get 6 green. So you add an amount of mana of that color equal to the number of creatures you control. So yeah, you just had 6 green. So in that case, you've only advanced your mana really by 3, because you have to tap 2 in this land, so that eats 3, but you get 6. So this is likely going to be something that more of the like tokens type decks are going to want, since they're more likely to have, a wider spread of them. But I could see this even included in just any creature deck potentially that has some way to spend that extra mana. This one's an uncommon called Plume-Creed Mentor, colorless, white-blue, 2/3 flying for a bird scout. Whenever it or another creature you control flying enters, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control without flying. So this is actually interesting. So it's a deck where you're going to want both flying and non-flying creatures, because you'll want this and other flyers to be able to pump up your other things. So I don't know if that means you want a bunch of stuff that cares about +1/+1 things. You want something that maybe there's creatures that give a bonus to flying creatures, so you could have it the other way as well. But this would be a card to keep an eye on as we get more cards previewed, of course. Castrol, the Wind-Crested, 3 colorless, white-blue, 4/5 bird scout with flying. Whenever one or more birds you control deal combat damage to a player, you choose one. So it's not for each, it's when one or more deal combat damage. So you may put a bird creature from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield with a finality counter on it. That's actually pretty sweet. Put a +1/+1 counter on each bird you control, also good, or you straight up draw a card. So you're either going to get to pump all your creatures, draw a card, or get a free bird creature with this thing. Yeah, if you're playing a bird-themed deck, this is obviously a creature you want to play as your top end. All right, this is Flowerfoot Swordmaster. It's a 1 mana 1/2, and I think this highlight here is just the site. Speaking of, for this one, I'm using Magic Spoiler, but this site probably just copied this off their live stream, which I'm assuming highlighted the Offspring ability while they were talking about it. So I imagine the card's not going to have this, just for anybody wondering. But anyway, this is a 1/2 for 1 mana, Mouse Soldier, Offspring 2, where you can pay 2 mana, then when you cast it, you'll also get a copy. It has Valiant. Whenever this creature becomes a target of a spell or ability for the first time, mice you control get a +1/+0. So this is a case where this one doesn't just pump itself, it pumps all your other mice if it's targeted. This is actually pretty good. If you're playing the mouse deck, this is just a value creature, a 1/2 for 1. But for 3 mana, you get 2 1/2s. And then at any point in the future, if you target this thing, all your other mice will get bigger. So this does count stuff like equipment as well, not just spells. Warren War Leader, 2 colorless, white, white for a Rabbit Knight 4/4. So not bad. And same thing, Offspring, pay 2. I don't know if that's going to be the cost always for Offspring, but definitely has been so far from the cards we've seen. Whenever you attack, choose 1. Create a 1/1 white rabbit creature token that's tapped and attacking. Attacking creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. This is actually just solid. I mean, it's a 4 mana 4/4. You can pump your team during the attack step if you want, or you just make another attacker. And we have seen things that care about tokens, care about the number of creatures. Yeah, so even just more rabbits potentially. So this could actually be a pretty good top end for, an aggressive rabbit type creature deck. Man, we got so many cards today. I'm trying to go faster, y'all. I'm sorry. Phineas Ace Archer, a green and a white for a 2/2 legendary rabbit archers. So it has reach, obviously, and vigilance. Whenever it attacks with a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control that's a token or a rabbit. Then if creatures you control have power 10 or greater, you draw a card. This card's cool. So you put a +1/+1 counter on, so this goes into a rabbit deck or a token deck. And then if you just have 10 power worth of creatures, you get to draw a card. So this could just go into a creature deck that happens to also make tokens, doesn't really care about if they're rabbits or not. So it still adds up all the power of all your creatures. Doesn't have to be just rabbits or tokens. So this is just a good all-around card. 2 mana, 2/2, reach and vigilance, and then upside of being able to pump itself and other things. So this is actually cool. Yeah, not much to say about this other than the fact that it has to attack to trigger maybe, and that could be its weakness, but it's still not a bad costed card. Valley Quest Caller, colorless and a white for a 2/3. So 2 mana for a 2/3, Rabbit Warrior. When one or more other rabbits, bats, birds, and or mice you control enter, you scry 1. Other rabbits, bats, birds, and mice you control get +1/+1. So, okay. Lot to say about this card. It's a 2 mana 2/3, already good. Pumps all the rest of your creatures, rabbits, bats, birds, mice, because I'm assuming that's all you're playing in these decks if you're playing this. So all your creatures get a +1/+1 on top of that. But then, whenever other ones come into play, you get to scry. This also doesn't say non-token, and we've already seen several rabbits that say, create a token. You also have the Offspring thing that makes tokens. So, yeah, this is cool. I guess it only scries 1 or more. So if you have 2 things enter at the same time, you wouldn't get to scry again. So there is that. But yeah, really cool card, honestly. This is definitely going to see a lot of play. Starseer Mentor, 3 colorless, white, black, 3/5, Bat Warlock, which is awesome. It has flying and vigilance for 5 mana, 3/5 flying vigilance. Alright, at the beginning of your end step, if you gained or lost life this turn, target opponent loses 3 life unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. Wow! So normally these are either or, if you lost life or if you gained life. In this case, if your life total changed at all, your opponent's going to have to sacrifice something or discard a card. Now, admittedly, this is 5 mana, and there's a lot you can do with 4 or 5 mana right now in both white and black, so I can't say that this is going to be heavily played. However, if you are playing a theme deck that does play bats, this is going to be a pretty annoying card for your opponent. Even worse if somehow it's in multiples. But for limited play, this will definitely be something you have to keep your eye on. Right, I'm going to take a shot at this and just call it Muera, Trash Tactician, which I know this is a raccoon before even looking at the creature type. Colorless, red-green, it's a raccoon warrior, 2/4. At the beginning of your first main phase, you add red or green for each raccoon you control. Wow. Whenever you expend 4, you gain 3 life, which when you spend 4, your 4th mana to cast something on your turn, you gain 3. Whenever you expend 8, so if you spend your 8th mana on the turn to cast something, exile the top 2 cards of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play those cards. Ooh, there's a lot to unpack here. It's a 3 mana 2/4, so not crazy on rate, but not bad. But then you automatically get mana each turn for this being on the battlefield. Like if there's nothing else, you're just getting an extra green or red every turn. But if you have 2 or 3 or whatever raccoons, well, now you have extra mana, which also fuels itself because if you expend 4, you gain 3 life. If you expend 8, you get to exile stuff that you can play next turn, which again fuels itself because now you have extra stuff to spend mana on. Like, this is a cool, almost a 1 card engine. Not quite, because you probably need some other raccoons. But this is just a cool card, honestly. Fireglass Mentor. Black-red for a 2/1 Lizard Warlock. At the beginning of your second main phase, if an opponent lost life this turn, exile the top 2 cards of your library. You choose one of them. Until end of turn, you may play that card. Yeah, okay. I mean, it's a 2-mana 2/1 if you're playing a Lizard type deck, or a Warlock deck, potentially, because we've seen a couple of Warlocks. Like, this is fine. If your opponent lost life, you get to look at 2 cards and pick one that you can play till end of turn. Also fine. Just a little bit of upside on a decent little costed card. Like, nothing too crazy. Camellia the Seed Miser. That's actually a hilarious title. The Seed Miser. Colorless black-green for a 3/3 Squirrel Warlock. It has Menace. Other squirrels you control have Menace. Oh, man. Whenever you sacrifice 1 or more food, create a squirrel token. Pay 2, forage, put a +1/+1 counter on each other squirrel you control. And then again, as we talked about in the mechanics thing, you forage, you exile 3 cards from your graveyard, or sacrifice a food. Oh man, this card's doing a lot for 3 mana, y'all. It's fortunate this thing's legendary, but it's a 3 mana 3/3 that has Menace. Already decent. All your other squirrels have Menace, which means they're going to be hard to block, though I imagine most of the squirrels are going to be kind of small. However, whenever you sacrifice 1 or more food, you also make squirrels. And you can forage multiple times. This doesn't say once per turn, so as long as you have mana and cards in your graveyard or food to sacrifice, you can just pay 2, forage, put counters on everything. Pay 2, forage, put counters on everything. So this could be a good top deck if you've been stockpiling food, or it's later in the game and a bunch of stuff has been going to your graveyard. Like, this card, definitely something you're going to play if you're playing black-green squirrels. Tidecaller Mentor. Colorless blue-black for a 3/3 rat wizard with Mentor. Threshold is, I believe Threshold is still when you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard. When this enters, if 7 or more cards, well, there it goes. If 7 or more cards in your graveyard, return up to 1 target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. All right, it's fine. It's probably not going to be super impressive in constructed play, but obviously this is more of a limited thing if you want to build around rats. Alania Divergent Storm, 3 colorless, blue-red, 3/5, Otter Wizard. Whenever you cast a spell, if it's the first instant spell, the first sorcery spell, or the first Otter spell other than Alania you've cast this turn, you may have target opponent draw a card. If you do, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copies. Wow. Okay, so this also second Otter we've seen for the set that's blue-red, I think, already. But this thing's actually pretty sweet. So the first instant, the first sorcery, and or the first Otter you cast each turn. All right, so let me reread this to make sure. Whenever you cast a spell, yeah, it doesn't even say if it's the first spell. It's just if it's the first instant, you'll get to do this. If it's the first sorcery, you'll get to do this. If it's the first Otter, you'll get to do this. So this potentially could happen 3 times in a turn. Not likely, but could. And then each time, you can just give your opponent a card to copy that thing. So you want to draw multiple cards, you want to shoot something multiple times, you want to get 2 Otters. That's a thing. So yeah, this card's kind of wild. All right, Lily Splash Mentor, 2 colorless, green-blue. So 4 mana for a 4/4 Frog Druid. So we got some frogs. This also has Reach, so that's not bad. And then you pay a colorless, a green, and a blue. Exile another target creature you control. Then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it. And you activate this as a sorcery. So yeah, 4 mana, 4/4 with Reach. Pay 3 mana. You get to bounce or blink something, depending on how you want to look at it. But yeah, this is actually pretty interesting. It just exiles, then returns. So yeah, just put a +1/+1 counter on a thing. It's a way to get easy counters if you're worried about the counters mechanic, if you have stuff that triggers on entering the battlefield. Yeah, just a cool card. A little bit pricey for some of the decks that are probably going to want it, but it is a sizable body. Glarb! Calamity's Augur. Black, green, blue, and it is a Frog Noble Wizard, so in 3 colors here, Sultai. It's a 2/4 with Death Touch. So 3 mana, 2/4 Death Touch. You can look at the top card of your library at any time. You can play lands and cast spells with mana value 4 or greater from the top of your library. And you can tap it to surveil too. This is interesting because usually these cards feel like they are cheaper things. This is a little bit different in the sense that you can play bigger things off of your library. Just like that other card we just saw that was 4 mana. You could play that or play lands. So yeah, this is one that I think if you're playing on theme, you play it, it's useful. Could be an interesting commander if you wanted to play it in Commander and just play more expensive things that you get access to. Kind of cool, especially if you have a bunch of other cards that can manipulate the top of your library. All right, this is 3 colorless, black for Maha Its Feathers Knight. That's Its Feathers Knight. That almost doesn't read correctly, but that's what's on the card. It's an elemental bird. It's a 6/5 for 5. Wow, flying trample. It has ward of discard a card. Creatures your opponents control have base toughness 1. This is what? Okay. First off, I thought birds were only going to be in blue and white, so it's interesting to see a black one. But 5 mana for a 6/5 flying trampler that also has ward of discard a card, and then all your opponent's creatures have 1 toughness. This thing's kind of silly. Now, how powerful is the 1 toughness thing? Depends on probably what the rest of the deck looks like. But man, this is a powerful card. This is, we're going to call this Igra, Eater of All. This is one of those like Calamity Beasts that we were talking about earlier that we were going to come back to. So 3 colorless, black-green for a 6/6. So 5 mana, 6/6. Seems to be a thing. 6 power creatures for 5. It's an elemental cat. It's legendary. It has ward of sacrifice of food. Okay. Other creatures are food artifacts in addition to their other types and have 2 sacrifice blah blah gain life like food normally has. Then whenever a food is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you put 2 +1/+1 counters on Igra, Eater of All. Wow, okay, so this card's at first, sacrifice of food as a ward cost look kind of wild. However, it turns all the other creatures into food, which is kind of hilarious. This thing gets to eat just other creatures. But it also counts your creatures and your opponent's creatures. So you could also just sacrifice your own food, gain life, make Igra bigger. But Igra also doesn't have any type of evasion. No menace, no trample, nothing like that. So I don't know how good this card is. On the one hand, you could also turn your stuff into food to help your squirrels out, because we've seen a couple of things in squirrels that care about food. So you could play squirrels and Igra, and then now all your squirrels are food. And since you're making squirrel tokens, you could sacrifice the food to get the bonuses. So that's probably going to be the more popular use of this card, more than it really just being a big attacker, but we'll see. All right, so the Planeswalker that is actually in the set is Ral, Crackling Wit. And we'd seen this artwork before, I just don't think we knew what it went to, so now we know. But it's 2 colorless, red-blue, for a Planeswalker, obviously, has loyalty 4. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you put a loyalty counter on this, so that's actually kind of neat. And you can +1, create a 1/1 blue and red otter creature token with prowess. You can -3, draw 3 cards, then discard 2 cards. Or you can -10 to draw 3 cards, and you get an emblem that says instant and sorcery spells you cast have Storm. And Storm means they're copied for the number of other spells you played for the turn. This is actually pretty sweet. It's a 5 loyalty effectively, because you can play it, immediately trigger it, it goes to 5. Get a 1/1 creature to block with. But then after that, every time you play a non-creature spell, you get to put more counters on it. So it's very likely to go to 5. The next turn you put it to 6. You play a couple of spells. So you might be able to get this to 10 by the 3rd turn. So the 4th turn it's on the battlefield, you can possibly use its ability. This is actually pretty cool, but even if nothing else, just making another otter with prowess is actually pretty good too. Or getting yourself access to more spells, right? In a pinch, you minus to draw 3, discard, and see if you can get stuff to start triggering all your other otter abilities. This is kind of cool. If you're playing an otter deck, or something that cares about a bunch of spells, this could be right up your alley. I swear this list is like never ending. Okay, this is Artist Talent, which happens to be a saga. Oh, this is a class card. So kind of like what we got in Baldur's Gate, I think it was. This is a colorless and a red, and you gain the next level as a sorcery to add its ability. So whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you can discard a card. If you do, you draw a card. And then you can pay 3 mana to move it to level 2. Non-creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And then you can pay 3 more mana to move it to level 3. If a source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent, or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage plus 2 instead. So this is actually just kind of fits the theme of the otters that we were kind of talking about already, right? Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you can discard a card. If you do, you draw a card. So it's a way to kind of keep fueling your hand if you have dead cards that aren't doing anything. But you can also make your stuff cost less, so it makes it easier for you to play multiple things. And then if you're dealing damage with those things, they'll deal an additional 2 damage. So it is a lot of mana here, though, right? Because you have to pay 2 to get it, so you're probably taking a turn off to get this onto the battlefield. Then you're also having to pay 3 at some point, and then probably paying 3 on the following turn. So that's a 8 mana investment to get the best end of this. But it could also go into a deck that doesn't even want creatures, right? This doesn't care about you wanting creatures at all. This is just about the spells. So if you just want to be able to get more cards, cycle through more things, play stuff cheaply, it might go into some type of blue, red, white type of control deck and actually be kind of sweet there. We did get to see some cards that I think are the face cards for the commander decks. This is Bellow, Bard of the Brambles. It's a 3 mana 3/3. During your turn, each non-equipment, artifact, and non-aura enchantment you control with mana value 4 or greater is a 4/4 elemental creature in addition to its other types. Whenever it deals damage to a... and they have the ability... Oh, they're indestructible and haste, and they have the ability, whenever they deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. Obviously not a standard legal card, but a really sweet commander if you want to play it, because, I mean, turning all your stuff into creatures is kind of a big deal. Zinnia Valley's Voice. Blue, red, and white for a 1/3 bird bard. Has flying. It gets +X/+0, where X is the number of other creatures you control with base power 1. So this wants you to play a bunch of, like, 1 power tokens. And creature spells you cast have offspring of 2, so everything gets to make an additional token, which is also good. So yeah, just a sweet card based around a new mechanic, but also works with old stuff. Right here we have Hazel of the Root Bloom, 2 colorless, black-green for a 3/5 squirrel druid. Tap it, pay 2 life, tap X untap tokens you control, add X mana in any combination of colors. So you tap it, pay 2 life, and you can tap a bunch of squirrels to make that much mana. Then at the beginning of your end step, create a token that's a copy of target token you control. If that token is a squirrel, instead you create 2 of those. So this is just the ultimate squirrel commander, right? You get to make a bunch of mana to cast whatever the heck you want. You also get to make 2 extra squirrel tokens every turn, assuming you're making other squirrel tokens. So yeah, this is actually just a sweet card if that's what you're into. And then the last one of these was Miss Bumbleflower, which is a cute name. Colorless, blue, green, white for a rabbit citizen 1/5 with vigilance. Whenever you cast a spell, target opponent draws a card. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. It gains flying until end of turn. If this is the second time this ability has resolved this turn, you draw 2 cards. So for the first spell you cast, your opponent gets to draw a card, but then you put a +1/+1 counter on a thing and has flying till end turn. But if it's the second time you do it, you also get to draw 2 cards. So after that, you just get to put +1/+1s on things and opponents draw a card. But it is target opponent, not each opponent, so you can play this in like a group hug kind of thing, or something where you're trying to make allies at the table, but kind of a cool commander to build around. This might be the funniest name of the set, Flubs, the Fool. So you're playing blue, green, red for a 0/5 Frog Scout. You can play an additional land on each of your turns. Whenever you play a land or cast a spell, draw a card if you have no cards in hand. Otherwise, you discard a card. That is interesting. So you're trying to empty your hands, you get access to more cards with it. Yeah, this is a quirky card. It's not standard legal. It looks like another commander card, but just cool, and I thought I'd mention it. Back to more standard stuff. So we have Thundertrap Trainer, colorless and a blue for a 1/2 Otter Wizard. Offspring of 4, so this actually is a higher offspring cost than we've seen. Whenever this creature enters, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You can reveal a non-creature, non-land card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in random order. This is why it costs more than 4, because you're basically getting another card when this enters the battlefield. So 2 mana, 1/2. You look at the top 4 cards of your library, put a non-creature, non-land into your hand. You can pay 6, get 2 creatures, look at the top 4, take a non-land, non-creature, look at the next top 4, take a non-land, non-creature. So yeah, this is actually not bad for the Otter decks, especially as a late game card to help you find more fuel. Pond Prophet. So you get double Sultai or Simic mana, so split blue-green. So 2 for a 1/1. Frog Advisor. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. All right, kind of straightforward. Nothing too crazy there. Season of Loss. 3 colorless, black, sorcery. Choose up to 5 paws worth of modes. You may choose the same mode more than once. So for 1, each player sacrifices a creature. For 2 paws, draw a card for each creature you control that died this turn. Or for 3 paws, each opponent loses X life, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. Oh my, this card. Ooh, so for 5 mana, you can have your opponent, each player sacrifice 5 creatures. Probably going to be the sweeper of choice for some black decks. But you can draw a card for each creature you control that died this turn. So you could also maybe do it for 3, everybody sacrifices 3. Then you spend the other 2 paws, because you get up to 5 worth, to draw 3 cards if you sacrifice 3 things. Or you can just pay 3, each opponent loses X life, or X the number of creature cards in your graveyard. So you could pay 2, everybody sacrifices 2, so there's more creatures in your graveyard. Then you pay 3, and your opponent loses just a pile of life because there's a bunch of stuff in your graveyard. So yeah, interesting card because it's a sweeper plus plus. So we'll see how this plays out, but this could end up being very good. Season of the Bold. So far the trend is each color has one of a season, and it's 5 mana. So for 3 colorless, red, choose 5 again. So for 1, create a tap treasure token. For 2, exile the top 2 cards of your library. Till end of the next turn, you can play those. For 3, until the end of your next turn, whenever you cast a spell, Season of the Bold deals 2 damage to up to 1 target creature. This doesn't feel as strong. I mean, you could pay 5 to make 5 treasure. Maybe good if you have things that care about artifacts or treasure. You can exile the top 2 cards of your library twice potentially and make a treasure. Or do it once and make 3 treasures, so you have the mana to cast them the next turn, but you already have 5 when you cast this. So not the craziest thing, but it does say until the end of your next turn, whenever you cast a spell, it deals 2 damage to a creature. So maybe you choose 2, so you can exile some things, and 3, so whenever you cast them, you target stuff. If it was any target, or even creature or planeswalker, that would make the third one a lot better, the third option. As is, it just kind of feels okay, unless it's something that cares about the treasure. Valley Rotcaller, colorless and a black for a 1/3 squirrel warlock. It has menace. Whenever Valley Rotcaller attacks, each opponent loses X life, and you gain X life, where X is the number of other squirrels, bats, rats, lizards you control. Yeah, this thing's going to be a menace. Well, it has menace, but this thing's going to be a menace. 2 mana, 1/3, and it can be in multiples. So whenever it attacks, your opponent just drains you for the number of other creatures attacking, basically. Actually, no, for all the creatures, not even other. Yeah, it does say other, so it doesn't count itself. So yeah, this is still very strong. And again, you're going to have to double block it because it has menace. So you're dedicating 2 things to that so you can kill it while they're also draining you for some amount and attacking you with a pile of other little dudes. So yeah, this is a pretty sweet card. Oh my god, I feel like this is going on forever. Head of the Homestead, 3 colorless. 2 more mana of Selesnya for 5 mana for a 3/2 Rabbit Citizen. When it enters, you create 2 white rabbit creature tokens. So you get 3 creatures for 5 mana, 2 1/1s, and a 3/2. It's good. It's more limited fodder because it's 5 mana, but it does do what you expect it to do. Shrike Force, which is a sweet name for a card, and it looks like a prayer again, just like bolting forward. But 2 colorless and a white for a 1/3, flying double strike vigilance. Yeah, this is solid. Like a 1/3 flying vigilance double striker, and it fits the bird theme. Yeah, this is cool. Probably gets a little bit of play, I imagine. So Biza, the Bounding Spring, 2 colors, white for 4/5 elk. First time we've seen an elk this set, so that's kind of sweet. It's a legendary creature, and then when it enters, create a treasure if opponent controls more lands. You gain 4 life if an opponent controls more life. You create 2 1/1 blue fish creature tokens if your opponent has more creatures. You draw a card if an opponent has more cards than you. Yeah, this card, you play this, right? Like if you're playing any type of aggressive creature, hell, maybe even in a mid-rangey deck that's not that aggressive because it's all upside. It's a 4 mana, 4/5 that possibly gets you a treasure, creatures, life, or cards. Nothing wrong with this card at all. This is just solid quality. Run away together. Colorless and a blue instant. Choose 2 target creatures controlled by different players. Return those creatures to their owner's hand. All right. I mean, bounce one of my things, bounce one of your things. Repel Calamity. A colorless and a white for an instant. Destroy target creature with power 4 or greater. Yeah, we've seen variations of this. Nothing too surprising. Ruthless Negotiation. It's black mana for a sorcery. Target opponent exiles a card from their hand. If this spell was cast from a graveyard, you draw a card. And has flashback 5. So for 1 black, your opponent chooses a card to exile, but you could play it from the graveyard later. They choose to exile something, and you get to draw a card. Don't think we're going to play this over like Duress or some of the other things we have, because you get to choose what they discard. But as an overall general discard theme, if you want some other cheap stuff to play alongside your Duress, maybe. Clement the Worrywarts. It's a colorless blue-green for a 3/3 frog druid with vigilance. Whenever Clement the Worrywart or another creature you control enters, return up to 1 target creature you control with lesser mana value to its owner's hand. Frogs you control have tap, add a green or a blue that can only be spent to cast creatures. Alright, so Clement is a 3 mana 3/3 with vigilance. When this card or another creature you control enters, you can return up to 1 target creature you control that costs less. So this enters, you can return something that costs 1 or 2, or 0, I guess, if you have like an Ornithopter. And I guess this is for things if you have a bunch of stuff that enters and has abilities, you want to replay those. And then, of course, all your stuff taps for mana, which is super great. So lots of stuff you could potentially do with this card. Dream Dew Entrancer. 2 colorless, green-blue for a 3/4 frog wizard with reach. When this enters, tap up to 1 target creature and put 3 stun counters on it. If you control that creature, you draw 2 cards. So this is actually a cool one, because it's a 3/4 reach for 4, which isn't like the craziest thing, but you can lock down a creature for 3 turns. Or, if you want to put it on one of your own things, you can just draw 2 cards, and then if you have a way to bounce it to your hand, you don't even get the penalty. You could just replay it with Clement that we just saw. So, because your other stuff taps for more mana. So this is actually kind of a cool little thing. This might find a spot in some of the frog decks. Oh man, okay, that was a lot. We got through everything. I don't know, this is going to be a long video. I'm sorry, there were just a billion cards. But really cool, lots of interesting stuff, lots of theme mechanics like we expected. We kind of started to get to see what each of the creature types are going to be doing. There's lots of stuff with flying, lots of stuff with menace, lots of things that are putting +1/+1s on things, lots of token makers. So there's going to be a lot of ways you can build decks in this set. So lots of cool stuff and several things that could fit into decks that already exist. So yeah, that's another thing. If you're looking for cards or decks that are already set up, that are rotation proof and rotation ready, I'm going to link a playlist here as well so you have access to that. But yeah, let me know how you feel about this set. That's all I have for you for now. We'll see you next time.